In the last lesson, we saw how to test the upload previews, how to cancel those uploads, and we even saw how not everything is covered with testing LiveView helpers and how we can fix that. In this lesson, I want to take a look at how we can test a direct-to-server approach, meaning we save the files locally. Let's go ahead and take a look at our LiveView. If you remember, under the /albums path, we have the LiveView index where we can go ahead and create an album with a name. Let's go ahead and call this Hobbit Home. Grab a few files. In this case, I'll grab a couple of them. And then we'll go ahead and hit this upload. This redirects to the album show page. And as you can see, it has the name of the album and the images included. Nothing fancy, but it's going to show us how we can test the direct server approach. Let's go ahead and take a look at our code. And go ahead and open up the index album live. And let's take a look at the pieces we didn't look at last time. So just as a recap, we have a form with a Phoenix submit save. That form has a name and the live input field for the uploads. And so if we go to the handle event callback for the save, we'll see what we're doing here. We have the params that are being passed in, and I'll scroll down here. We have those params, and we're going to pass them through a change set and insert that. But of course, if you look at our album, it doesn't only have the name, but it also has a photo URLs field. That's an array. And that is where we're going to store the photo URLs for all the photos. So how do we get those? If you've done any uploads with LiveView before, you'll know this. We're going to consume the uploaded entries, and that gives us some metadata here. We're just going to pull the path. And this is the temporary path where that file upload is stored, and the entry. We're going to go ahead and create a destination for that file. So what we're trying to do is copy from the temporary path to a new destination path. That destination path, if you look at this upload destination, is an uploads directory that we have, which is just under static, and then the file name. And we're generating a file name based on the entries UUID and the client name. And then we're going to copy that file, and then we're going to return the public path. And so, for example, this is going to be something like priv static uploads. And in tests, this is actually going to be /test. And then the public path is uploads. And once again, in test, the public path will be uploads test. So we return those URLs, and we just put those in the params so that when we insert the album change set, we create an album both with the name and the photo URLs. And finally, we push navigate to the album show path. If you take a look at the album show live view, you'll see this is a very simple live view. All it's doing is rendering the album name. And for each photo URL, we are rendering an image tag with the data role image. And that's an important aspect because we're going to target this image through the data role in our test. And then we have a backlink to navigate back to the index page. Now let's go ahead and see how we can test this. Open up your album index test, because we're going to test everything through the index, because that's when we create this and we can render it. So let's go ahead and add a new test. We'll say that the user can submit album with images. Take in the connection struct as usual, and I'll go ahead and copy some of the other tests. So I'll go ahead and copy this, steal this part right here. So the way we'll test this is as follows. We want to upload the images, and then we want to target the form and then submit that form. So we have this upload helper that we've seen before, and we'll just go ahead and use it. We'll upload Moria Door, and then we're going to target the same upload form, and let's give this a good name. Let's call it Moria Adventures. And then rather than render change, which is what I copied from the other test, is going to be a render submit. Once we submit that, we're doing that push navigate. And we saw this in a previous lesson, but we saw it through the UI when we were clicking the link component, and it would do a navigation between two live views of the same live session. We can follow a redirect. And the follow redirect takes the con, so we need to pass it there. So once again, we are going to upload the images. This does the image previews. Then we're going to grab the form and submit that with the name and render submit. So that's going to submit the whole form with the images uploaded. That should consume the uploaded images, save them, and then we're going to follow the redirect because it's going to take us to the show page. And this is another live view, so we can go ahead and grab the live view from here, and we'll call this show view, and ignore the HTML. And now we can make assertions of the show view. So what can we say here? We're going to go ahead and assert that the title is Moria Adventures. So this helps us test that we are actually saving this title. And then we can assert that we have that data role of image present. Excellent. So let's go ahead and run this test and see where it takes us. Perfect, it passes. Now, just as before, let's go ahead and delete some pieces of code to see what exactly our test is doing. I'll go ahead and go back to the index, and let's go ahead and not include the photo URLs, and I'll rerun that test. And sure enough, we see that our test is failing because we don't have that data role image. So we try to save this, but it's not rendering that data role. Perfect. So that's one really important piece to test. And you can also see this in the show page. If we go ahead and, for example, delete that image tag, this should be failing. Excellent. And of course, if we go back to the index page, if we go ahead and delete the whole save event, this will most definitely fail. Excellent. So this is how we're testing uploads completely. Uploads inside a form that has other things going on for it. So we have the name, we have the uploads, we have redirection to a different live view. So this is a full-fledged test. But before we go, I want to take a look at a couple of things that I think make this test interesting. I'll go back to the index test. And first of all, as we've done before, we want to keep things at the same level of abstraction in a test. Right now, we have one level of abstraction here. This is all encapsulated under the upload function. But then we have this lower level of abstraction, which we're dealing with the form directly and render submit. So just like we did before, I would like to extract this into a helper function. I'll go ahead and call this create album, take the view and the name of the album. That's the name there. Excellent. And then I'll go ahead and just call this create album. So I like this a lot better. It reads a lot more cleanly. We have the view, we have an upload, we create the album, and we followed our redirect. Go ahead and rerun this test to make sure everything's passing, everything's good. Excellent. But there's one last thing I'd like to do. If you take a look at your files under uploads, you'll see that we have some uploads from testing things locally, but more importantly, we have uploads from our tests. Now, the interesting thing is that every time you run this test, you're going to keep adding uploads to that directory. Let's take a look at this. I'll rerun the test. And let's rerun that command. And as you can see, there's one more upload, right? Now, what can we do? What I like to do is go ahead and remove all the uploads in that directory before we run the test so that we continuously clean it. Otherwise, you either commit this to your code base and that keeps growing every time you run your tests, or you have to manually remove these every time before you commit your code. And I find that to be a really bad experience. So what I want to do is go ahead and remove this directory on the setup function. So we'll go ahead and do a little bit of setup before each test. And we'll use onExit, which allows us to run a function right when the test is exiting. And what we'll do here is we're going to go ahead and remove that directory. And that directory is encapsulated in Ranger uploads directory. Now, once we remove it, we also need to recreate it for the next test, because if the directory isn't created, we can't save files into that directory. So I'll go ahead and also recreate that directory after every test. So let me go ahead and run the test and see that we no longer are keeping those uploads under test. And then I'll explain a little bit about what we're doing in this Ranger uploads directory. So I'll go ahead and rerun the past test. Excellent, it passes. But if we now look at our uploads test, there are no files there. So that's really good. Of course, if you upload any files in development, you'll still have those there, and those you might have to remove manually unless you want to keep those. That is up to you. Now let's talk about why I'm using Ranger uploads directory here. If you open up Ranger, you'll see that we have a few functions defined. And now you can define these anywhere. I'm defining them in Ranger for convenience. We have a public uploads path and an uploads directory. These are using application configuration, and they fall back to a default path. In this case, the defaults are uploads for the public path and priv static uploads for the uploads directory. Why am I doing this? If you go to the index, you'll notice that when we generate the upload destination, we use this uploads directory. Now, Many people might just do this directly inline. So rather than doing this, you could imagine doing priv static uploads. And rather than relying on an uploads path, we really might just say /uploads. Now this works, and it works just fine in tests. The only problem with this is that anytime we run the test, we'll keep accumulating uploads in this /uploads directory like we saw before. But if we want to go ahead and remove those uploads, we would have to remove all of the uploads in the uploads directory, which means we would also remove any uploads you've done in development. And I find that to be a bad experience. You could be testing in development, you run your tests, and all of a sudden the uploads you had uploaded are now gone because we deleted that whole directory. To avoid that issue, I go ahead and rely on configuration with a default path. So now, once again, let's go ahead and take a look at Ranger. You can see that we're relying on Ranger configuration, and only when that configuration isn't defined do we then go to the default. So what we do is in config test, we define some new uploads directories only for our tests, right? And so the public uploads path is uploads test, and the uploads directory is priv static uploads test. This allows us to delete the entire test directory and to recreate it without affecting the uploads directory for development. I hope that makes sense. This is a quality of life improvement. It's not necessary for testing uploads, but I find it really helpful and useful when we're deleting files constantly and we don't want to affect development. One last thing to note is that because we're removing an entire directory of files, we have to run our tests in async false. Otherwise, we could run into an issue where we are trying to test that an image is there, but another test is running concurrently and the file gets deleted. All right, that's it for testing uploads directly to the server. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at how we test uploads when we upload them to the cloud. I'll see you there.